Flawedcast, episode 100, Verisimilitude. One believes things because one has been conditioned to believe them. Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. Until you realize how easy it is for your mind to be manipulated, you remain the puppet of someone else's game. Avita Ocho, Flawedcast.
Get in the arena.
Hey everybody, want to welcome you back to a brand new fun-filled, hopefully mind-expanding, jarring episode of Flawedcast. And as always, my trusty cohort, Mr. Carl Tuckerson, is with us.
It's good to be here. I really think that I need to talk to someone about all of the time that is being invested in show prep. I swear it feels like we already did a podcast. I mean, we are going way overboard. I'm going to have to contact my union representative for this craziness.
Yeah. So in full disclosure, this is the second time we are recording this episode. We did one the day before, but Carl's working theory is that the deep state hacked into the system and they're like, nah, people don't need to hear that.
I mean, that was well over the 100th podcast that has been done on Flawedcast. Everyone's been done the same way. Yesterday was the greatest podcast ever recorded on any outlet, any media.
I'll go with that.
It was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, at the time of closure, we look at the screen and all information's gone. Come on, Bill.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, I don't dispute that. They're no fans of us, but that's okay. We're no fans of them either. I don't care.
I love them.
Yeah. You ever see Friends? You know how Ross does that thing?
Yeah.
Well, that's to them.
I have seen that.
Yeah. At any rate, we do want to thank you guys again for listening. Make sure you share, make sure you subscribe, listen, and this is a big thank you from Carl and I both, because right now the episode is called Die Human, number 99. We put out within 2 days, it has already had more listens, downloads, and shares than the last episode that's been out a week and a half at the point as you're listening to it. So listen, we want to thank you guys. We are committing and promising to you that we are continuing to deliver these things as God gives them to us. And we're not going to shy away from controversy. We're not going to shy away from quote unquote taboo or things that you shouldn't talk about. We're just going to simply ask, to quote my good buddy, why? So once again, we are everywhere you can listen to podcasts. Flawedcast CLE, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Breaker. You can find us on Rumble and YouTube, Flawed Inc. We're on the Project Mockingbird social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on Parler, we're on Gab, we're on MeWe, Flawed Inc. As Christmas draws near, as you are listening to this, it's the day after the bird was consumed, so I guess it's the official Christmas season. And when you're done with your tryptophan hangovers from all the bird, get a copy of my book, Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual. And it's not about me as it is with the podcast, it's about the information. So I just want to thank you guys. But that being said, all right, so as our custom, as our tradition, take your right hand, place it over your left heart, and repeat after us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so quick pause. This is the 100th episode. This is a milestone. A lot of podcasts don't get to this point, and I want to just literally thank everybody that's been on the journey. I want to thank Carl. I want to thank Jason, John, Norm, Matt, all of our guests before, Ed, Tim, Isaac, Cole. There's been so many of people that have helped and participated and supported. So from the bottom of my heart, I do want to thank you. And like I said, we dedicate and we pledge ourselves to continuing to fight against tyranny, this evil governmental, but more importantly, this spiritual tyranny, the system of the Antichrist that is arising. And this is going to be a very important, I would say a crucial component in fighting this new kind of warfare that we're engaged in. And, you know, people hear the term spiritual warfare and they think it's like this esoteric, distant thing, but it isn't. The battlefield is in the mind. The battlefield is everywhere we go and everywhere we walk. And it's like the new metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg is going to be introducing. It's important we submerge ourselves in not virtual reality, but the reality. And the reality is that we are all spiritual beings and that we have a plan and a purpose, and that God himself, through the sacrificial act of his son, allows us to alter that supernatural reality, which is the real reality. And we're going to get into the idea of the mind, the power of the mind, a very elementary working of the mind, because neither Carl nor I are doctors or scientists or
Right. But we have used the information that they have found out. So
yes. So
So what is it? Someone told me one time, you do not have to be the guy. You just have to know the guy. So we took their information and we processed it. But I like to interject briefly before we get into the topic. This whole podcast really originated about 2 years ago when the government tried to take control and isolate us and lock us up and put us in our house so that we would all be trapped in our homes with the internet and their media and sit there like zombies watching it. And I am telling anyone today that is listening, if you feel like you are in a battle for control with the government over anything, I don't care what it is, I don't care what issue, if you feel as though the government is seizing control away from you, this podcast is a must listen. This podcast is a must share. I truly believe that.
We have an accord. So let's kind of just get into a couple real quick things. So I'm going to assume that most people have not heard of verisimilitude. Let me just give you a real quick definition. In philosophy, verisimilitude is the notion of some propositions are closer to being true than other propositions.
And the truth about that is, my understanding is that it still would be false.
Pretty much.
1% outside of 100% truth in verisimilitude is false. So we established that like right out of the gate. As close as you can get to true is still,
not being true.
It's still too far away from me.
Well, and just kind of a background where I heard that from is the 1970s version of Superman directed by Richard Donner, starring Christopher Reeve. His goal was to manipulate and as close as possible with these extraordinary circumstances to make a reality-based superhero film, and I believe he did. That's still one of my favorite.
Heck of a job.
Yeah,
he
still
did
one
a
of my
heck of a
favorite.
job.
Yeah. But nonetheless, so how does that apply to where we're going with the mind? Well, as it is being that we have been grossly manipulated culturally, scientifically, biologically, that the powers that the mind holds is now being manipulated to where we are becoming in this collective thought process. And one of the things that kind of looked into as we were preparing for this is the idea of like cult programming. You look at a guy like Jim Jones or Charles Manson, these guys who were these cult leaders, they were these fugazi messianic identities. And one thing that happens with this cultish behavior is that this collective mind hive thinking comes to where the individual and the power to commune as an individual is eroded. And that's what we're seeing. And once again, Carl and I aren't quote unquote scholars, but we just simply look at the facts and we go wherever those facts lead us. We have been manipulated. We have been doped down or doped up, you could say, mentally and spiritually to where it's hard for a lot of people to understand what is reality. So we're going to come at you with scientific facts. I'm going to come at you with some real verifiable history and then also the reality of the scriptures that is the red pill in the veritable matrix that we've now entered into that you guys need. So let me just start this off with a couple different things. So first, Colossians 1 verse 21, this is from the New International Version. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your mind because of your evil behavior. So it says we were enemies in our mind towards God. We were the mind that we were enemies because of our behavior. Well, behavior are things that you learn. Behaviors are things that you pick up. Behaviors are traits that you develop. Like, for example, I get up in the morning, Shandy goes make it a caca. I go make it a caca. I'd like to try to exercise. That's when I have my time. I meditate, I pray, and talk to God. These are behaviors that I have established that I hope help me to not have adversarial effects with the Almighty, that I hope to engage and flourish my friendship with him, but it's these behaviors. So many of us get up, the first thing we do, and I am admittedly guilty of this sometimes because my alarm is on my phone and, I'll grab like, holy crap, I got 98 texts last night. But long story short is that we are programmed in the second now we wake up, we're automatically aware of the matrix. And I wanted to share a couple other things. There's a guy named Mike Cernovich who I like to listen to, and he had this quote the other day. It said, the benefit of trauma is moral clarity. And I thought, when he said that, that really rang true to me, because one of the things I think that helps navigate is when you go through things that cause trauma, that cause stress, that cause us to be pushed to our outer limits, we have to come to a point where we realize if we are going to continue on, we have to call out and put our hand to a source, quote unquote, that is beyond us.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is that everyone that's listening has been through traumatic experience. Most of mine, Bill, has been created by my choices. I have self-sabotaged a lot of my life. I myself have created circumstances that have brought in chaos that in the end actually opened the door for destruction, hurt, and pain. That wasn't God not moving. That wasn't the devil creating. Now, the devil likes to take credit for a lot of the bad stuff that happens in our life, but in reality, I've come to a point where I realized that was my making. So it wasn't what I went through in my traumatic experiences, it's how I responded. How did I respond? What did I do in response to that? And if that is something that is handled properly, you will come through the other side of that a better man or a better woman. That doesn't mean you won't be scarred. I'm scarred. I'll never be the same again as I was before a lot of that, but I'm better.
I would equate that to that moral clarity, whatever that is for you.
Yeah, exactly.
But, the testing of our faith developed perseverance. Perseverance develops character. Character produces hope. That's what I equate that to. But I hope that you're able to understand that, whether it be through mainstream media, news outlets, programming, i.e. movies, Netflix, even pop culture now, there's a subversiveness that, Colin and I are part of Generation X, and the thing I read or listened basically said that Generation X is the last generation to not have been raised in a fully submersive virtual reality. And for us, I would like to think it's a little easier to unplug and be in a place with the reality of God becomes our reality. But there's been a long history, at least in the governmental sense, that this is something that's being perpetrated towards us. And after the Allies beat the Axis, there were a lot of things that happened. And we've talked about this on the show. And some of that we're going to talk about today is the whole idea of like mass mind control, mass crowd manipulation, mass deception on a now global level. So one of the things I want to really begin to talk about, and this is a big thing, like you can watch movies and TV shows, and there's a lot of documentaries that talk about this. It's called Project MK Ultra or MK Ultra. Let me give you a little background on this thing. MK Ultra was the code name of the illegal human experimentation program signed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, which, as a side note here, for those that don't know, the CIA is not supposed to be operating on American soil. Their sole purpose for being in existence is to operate internationally. The FBI is the law enforcement agency that operates on American soil. So anytime the CIA is doing anything that is on American soil, they're technically operating outside of their jurisdiction.
Thus the word spies. That doesn't come from the FBI, although they now appear to have spies within the FBI, but spies, undercover, other countries. The concept is simple.
All that
and
stuff,
on and on and on.
Yeah. Just a little FYI. The experiments were intended to develop procedures and identify drugs such as LSD that could be used in interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate a subject's mental status and brain functions, such as the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD, and other chemicals, electroshock, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, talk about the lockdowns for last year.
That's right.
And verbal and sexual abuse, in addition to other forms of torture. MK Ultra was preceded by two drug-related experiments, Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, and began in 1953, was reduced in scope in 1964 and 1967, and was halted in 1973, allegedly. It was organized through the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence and coordinated with the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. The program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of U.S. and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. Go back to our episode about the Nuremberg Code. You have to have informed consent, or else it is lawfully and ethically illegal to conduct these kinds of experiments on people. MK Ultra scope was broad, and activities were carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions, including colleges and universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated using front organizations through some top officials at these institutions, although some top officials of these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. MKUltra was first brought to public attention in 1975 by the Church Committee of the United States Congress and Gerald Ford's United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, also known as the Rockefeller Commission. Investigative efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helms' order to all MKUltra files be destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations relied on the sworn testimonies of direct participants and on the small number of documents that survived Helms' order. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MKUltra, which led to Senate hearings. Some surviving information about MKUltra was declassified in July of 2001. In December of 2018, declassified documents revealed that the CIA made 6 dogs run, turn, and stop via remote control and brain implants as part of the MKUltra.
It almost sounds like a Hollywood movie. It almost sounds like it's not real, it's not true, but it's verifiable, and the people, the listeners right now can look it up themselves, can read it themselves, can see it in person themselves by simply going on the internet. It is there. It is true. Hard to believe, but it's factual.
Not only is it factual, there's instances in American history, that is, that you can point out to where there are people that are in the public view that have been victims of this. The first one notably that comes to my mind is Sirhan Sirhan, who assassinated Robert Kennedy. And we were talking the other day, like literally, if you look at the footage, the guy was eyes were glassed over, complete trance.
Well, the eyewitness accounts were what got me, because I could misinterpret what I'm seeing, right? But the people that were interviewed independently of each other, who had no idea what any other eyewitness said, they gave the same account. The best description of how he was that he was in a trance. Mm-hmm. They used the same word. They used the same description. The guy passed lie detector test, proving that he literally had no account of what had happened. Mm-hmm. He was out of his mind.
Yeah. Once again, think what you will. Look that up. We're not blowing smoke. You know, and there's a recent book that came out, and the gentleman's name is Tom O'Neill, and the name of the book is called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Direct History of the 60s. And he was actually on Joe Rogan's podcast recently, talks about Charles Manson's involvement with the CIA. So in this MKUltra, you can even kind of look this into the Men Who Stare at Goats, even though that movie is fictional. That's based on a lot of these MKUltra studies. So it's this idea that the hellacious things that happened under Hitler's watch was all a beta test for what we're seeing now. And through the development for the decades, I mean, this program was, quote unquote, in operation for 20 years. And what they've done there, I believe, is now being perfected on a mass scale.
This was an extreme measure. This was an isolated, individual, tested level. But right now, we're having society, not to that level of brain implant. I've never had a brain implant, thank God. But
that you know of.
Well, it's a good point. Now that I think about it, maybe it slipped my mind. But anyways, that's an extreme level of mind control. But if you can develop a trend within society through manipulation and through influence of media, you don't have to insert a chip. Trends use neighbors to peer pressure people into doing things. And so in society, the goal is really to develop a trend, even in advertising. Yeah. You know, the pet rock was the greatest selling toy of all time. And it wasn't advertised that much. It was a trend. It was a neighbor calling a neighbor. It was family telling family, oh, you have to do this. Your child will love it. And when the trend developed, no longer did the advertising company have to do anything, because the neighbors were peer pressuring people into purchasing. And that's the greatest goal of an advertising committee or a governmental institution. institution that is trying to influence and manipulate. If they can get society to have a trend developed in the direction they want, they no longer need mind control experiments. They don't need a chip. They don't need to abuse you mentally, because your neighbors, they will peer pressure you into going in the direction that the government has steered society, and they can develop a trend, a mindset. They don't need to do those drastic measures if they can develop a trend. And I will tell you, Bill, and anyone listening, my perspective right now as I sit here is that there are trends in society that are superseding facts, superseding truth. They are combating the moral and ethical and spiritual values that this great country was founded on. And we will take control back. I can speak for this podcast. I can speak for myself individually. I will fight the war without weaponry because I do not battle in the flesh. I battle through the Spirit. The war that is waged against us, according to God's word, is in the flesh. It is using the weapons of man, the weapons of humanity for evil. And the Bible says that we can't fight that battle and win through the flesh. We have to turn through the Spirit, enter in the Spirit, fight things spiritually. And so I'm going to fight against this trend that has developed in this society, and I'm going to get the truth out there with the time that I have left on this earth.
That was well said. I want to bring something to your attention. Let's kind of bring this into modern context. I was talking to a good friend of mine, and she was saying how her daughters, and she's in her mid-teens, all her friends have gotten the jabs. It's the coolest thing. You know, they're telling kids you could be a superhero. Big Bird and Elmo got their jabs. And it's the same idea that you're talking about. They use things like what the SS was doing. They worked and perfected and tweaked it during this MK Ultra. So now they had gathered the data. They did the hard research. These people were against the Nuremberg Code, not having that informed consent. They tweaked and perfected and adjusted here and made a little tightening over here and this and that, so they can perfect the data to where they now have a recipe. They now have a formula that not just worked on an individual basis, but it works on a global system in a global way that the Antichrist system has manipulated. And an example is, like I was saying to you the other day, I was watching a documentary about the Universal Monsters, and they were talking how in the 40s and 50s that they would advertise subversively. And back in the day when they shot film, 24 frames is 1 second. So whenever you watch a movie, every second is composed of 24 frames. And what they would do is they would replace one single frame of celluloid with a picture of a Coke and popcorn. And people would start to crave Coke, or wait, wow, I need some popcorn. So it's these subtle subversive things that are implanted through our subconscious that we are now in this place where I question even myself, like, how much control do I really have over my thoughts? How much am I not being swayed or influenced by outside forces? So lately I've been a real big fan of Russell Brand's podcast, and I wasn't too keen on the guy before, but he's really kind of sharing a lot of information I think is really vital. At least, you know, I'm going back to Hosea 8:7, my people perish for a lack of knowledge, kind of a thing. So he recently on one of his podcasts, and I'll put a link though, he had a Stanford doctor.
I actually think she was the doctor at Stanford. Like.
Yeah, this is a high-ranking neurologist, psychologist, like anything involving the brain. Her Dr. Anna Lemke is her name, and she was talking about the dopamine receptors in the mind and how the mind works, and Carl is going to share a lot more information. But basically, through this, what she alluded to is that the manipulation of our dopamine, which I've talked about before, it allows us to have emotional highs and emotional lows, and it's an addictive thing in our mind. It also, I think, has to do a lot with attention span. And, you know, the Psychology Today article I read talked about the attention span of most people in America is less than that of the goldfish. Now we are here at this point, but as Dr. Lemke was explaining these things and explaining how the neuroses of the mind works and how our engagement in society and modern technology and being on our phones and being immersed in these games and these communities like that, it's creating constant highs. Our dopamines are constantly putting out, and it affects our emotional stability, if I can word it that way. But the one thing she said, and we're going to get into this in a moment, is in more detail, is that you develop develop addictive personalities and addictive traits through these things because you constantly crave it. You constantly need your phone. You constantly need to be playing this game. You constantly need to do that because it alters your mood. If you're not, you're like completely bummed. You're completely anxiety ridden, so on and so forth, by and large. But she said that people who go through these things, and even people in recovery, AA, things of that nature, the ones that have a connection to God have the greatest success rates. And she said, basically, we are now as a society, if we're going to have any kind of sustainable future as humanity, we're going to have to wean ourselves off of these devices and learn how to regulate and control our dopamine receptors. Coral?
Yeah. So I was going to say that this whole journey I'm on and have arrived to, it started under Daddy DeWine's curfew. I didn't like the fact that as a grown man, for any reason, someone was going to tell me to not go out after 10. I didn't do very well accepting that as a teenager when my real dad and mom told me not to leave the house or that I couldn't leave. And so that was the line that I kind of drew in no control or fighting for control. So I did what I do when I am confronted with a situation that I don't like. I responded in a way that I knew would be okay with God. I just went ahead and did whatever I wanted. I disregarded the curfew like I did when I was 16. Now, when I was 16, that was really bad. Like I should have respected and listened. But as a grown man, realizing that a virus doesn't get more intense at 10:01, it isn't more contagious at 10:01, it isn't more deadly at 10:01, it doesn't spread differently at 10:01. Nothing really changed between 9:59 and 10:01. So I did use logic, and I did decide that I was going to go ahead and do whatever I wanted to do because this is America, not China. I don't know if anyone else made that decision. Bill's pointing to himself.
No, I did, yeah.
But the other thing that I did was I decided I was tired of the attack on my control of my life as an individual. So I decided that I would utilize the time that we were now in a different societal structure where there wasn't as much open and there wasn't as many places to go, right? And there wasn't as much to do. And I was going to evaluate in my life where I was and where I needed to go. And so about 2 years ago, Bill, I totally changed my lifestyle. I changed, as you were talking about, your morning routine. Another word for that is habit. I have a habitual morning routine now that is second nature, that developed because of the government, because of them trying to control me and tell me things. And I spit in the face of that and said, I'm going to take control of my life. I'm not going to do what you want me to do by trapping me in my house, in my home. And what I realized without knowing is that I started to reshape my thinking. I started to reshape my mindset. I started to reshape everything about my processing. And by doing that, that reshaped who I was. I wasn't trying to reshape who I was. It was a natural byproduct of the decisions and choices that I made in response to what was happening to me. I took control back. And now, through this podcast study, I realized what I did. I didn't know before. I knew something was different. I knew I was seeing things differently. I knew I was changing. I didn't understand why. And now I'm going to explain why. As I was studying for many hours about this, I'm going to give an elementary explanation of the human brain. And at that level, that is more than enough for anyone to understand the importance of the decisions they make of what goes into their brain.
Yeah, explain it to me like I'm 5.
Like I did yesterday?
Yeah, well, explain it to our audience like they're 5, but then explain it to me like I'm 4.
Yeah, so this is the way that the human brain works. Anything you see or hear has to enter through your brain. There is an interaction that takes place with the brain where the brain, although it is one whole unit, has certain responsibilities. And the very door into your brain, into your thought process, is called the prefrontal cortex. That's the door. And that door opens up to the frontal lobe of the brain, which is the biggest part of the brain, right? It's the part that sends everything to other areas. It's your access to thought. So the prefrontal cortex allows the frontal lobe to get that information, which would be what you see, what you hear, right? That is what is processed. When that information is sent to the lower brainstem is the part of the brain that controls equals many different things. One of them is pleasure and pain. That is how addictions can take place, is that euphoric high that we search of pleasure. And when we get to this real high place and then we come back down, those emotional swings can be so great that we become depressed, we become oppressed, we become suicidal. And I really believe that the reason of the mass rise of suicides during this pandemic is directly tied to the emotional swings that have taken place, is that the lows have become lower and people are staying longer and they are being deprived of social interaction. People's wives and husbands have died and the government said you cannot go be with them and they're having regret. People didn't get to see family members for the last time after 50, 60 years of marriage. And moms, I had to deal with my mom in the hospital almost dying and them telling me you can't come here to be with her because daddy government said no. There are emotional swings that happen in us and they become so great that we can develop so many strongholds if we don't have an equal swing to equal ground. Am I doing all right so far, Bill? Do you have anything to add?
Fascinated by what you're saying. When you're talking about isolation during this, one of the main components that MK Ultra used in these experiments is isolation. So I want that to sink in, that what we're talking about, this as quote unquote lockdown, this isolation from people, not being able to be with your mom, for example. And I remember when that was going on and praying and all that. So everything you're saying, in my perspective, is purposeful.
Let me tell you how I spit in the face and defied the mandates in the government by isolation. Because isolation depends on your response being what they depend on you doing. Okay? So when they isolate and trap, they're hoping that you sit right in front of your computer screen and right in front of your television and get right on your phone and start reading the garbage that they are putting out there. If they can isolate you and trap you and change your lifestyle, and they can force you to read what is propaganda and lie and not truth, they can enter that information, Bill, through the prefrontal cortex, and that information will get into the frontal lobe. And when the frontal lobe does its job, which interacts with the lower brain stem to actually cause emotional highs and emotional lows, that's also the place, Bill, funny enough, in the lower brain stem where social interaction and social relationships are developed and handled. Isn't that amazing? The destruction of society, the destruction of social interactions, where if you're a different color, you need to hate the people. If you're a different social class, you need to hate people. Well, all of that can only happen, people, if you willingly allow through your prefrontal cortex on your decision, your choice. It's what you see. It's what you choose to take the time of isolation and sit there and put into your mind. And what I did was I changed my life. I changed my total lifestyle. I started every single morning. Not one morning that goes by happens any other way. I start to shape and mold the thoughts in my mind through that process of the frontal lobe and that door, the prefrontal cortex, by feeding my mind God's truth. I shape how I view myself, not by society labeling me as a racist, a bigot, a homophobe, a hater, a white supremacist, or anything else. God shapes my day and my mind and how I view myself. That's the view I have of myself.
And I would say, just to interject, in your view of the world also.
Absolutely.
For me, as I'm hearing that, there's a lot of things, I'll get to in a second, but as these accusations being hurled to you, I think a natural human defense is to be like, no, I'm not that, you're that. So it's not just a matter of your perception through the lens of the Almighty towards you, but it's also allowing his perception of the world to be refined to your lens as you look at the world.
Absolutely. And let me tell you the response, and let me tell you the effects of how this happens to work in my life. Some of my greatest friends are homosexuals. Yes, that's right. Some of my greatest friends are lesbians. I have many atheists that are my friends. And you know why? Not because I agree or endorse the lifestyle that they live, but because I love them and treat them as a human better than the people that live that lifestyle. I verify what I say by how I live. Not all the time. Nobody's perfect. We struggle. We fight. But the reality is, I am not called to treat someone that lives a different lifestyle unlovingly or judgmentally. And this is what I tell all of them, and this is why we get along. There is not one word they say to me and how they describe me that has any impact in my life, because they do not shape the view of myself and who I know I am. And nor do I want to have the power given to me by them to hurt them, to label them, to impact them. Like, I don't want that power. I am not asking for it. I deny it. And I let them know I am not in the position of the power to validate you or to validate your lifestyle. That is not who I am. That is not what I want. No matter how much I tell you I endorse your lifestyle, you will never be more validated than you are before I said that. The validation in your life of how you look at yourself and how you view yourself and how you see yourself and how you feel inside can never be increased because a government made a law for you to be accepted. You will never be more validated at how you feel and how you look at yourself and what you think about yourself because society is forced to embrace your lifestyle. That lack of validation that is in a person's life is there because deep down inside they do not feel validated. And no matter what happens and no matter what laws are made, they will never feel validated because they have not allowed God to validate them. They are missing the validation that matters the most from the Almighty, from their Creator.
So what you're saying is there is no such thing as essential or non-essential. There is the view of God and his sacrificial act through the cross to them.
100%. And until people will quit and they will start rejecting labels and they will start rejecting the propaganda that the government has tried to divide society in, and they will choose to take power back and they will make a daily decision to allow through the prefrontal cortex to the frontal lobe to the interaction to the lower brain stem, you will regain control of how you think, of how you view, of how you act. No matter what happens to you, your response will always feel as though you are in control. They can do nothing to me. Nothing to me. Because if they isolate me and they take my platform away and they lock me up in a closet, I still have the ability to take my prefrontal cortex, Bill, and that frontal lobe and interact with that lower brain stem. And I have a way to communicate with my God in that closet, and there's nothing they can do. And they cut Watchman Nee's tongue out of his mouth in China because he was a preacher. And so guess what he did in isolation? He started writing books.
Author. Yeah.
He wrote books and became one of the greatest Christian writers. So, it is your response. It is not what happens. It is not what they do to you. If you take the power back and take control back and understand the workings of the mind, verified by this doctor from Stanford, Dr. Lemke, by the way, is an atheist, by the way, supports evolutionists by evolution.
Yeah, her discussion in regards to the spiritual connection was obtrusive to her.
She did not say
she was
God.
Repulsed.
She did not say God. She just said, unfortunately,
a spiritual connection.
Unfortunately, we have scientific evidence that supports that those that turned to spiritual strength do much better. Yeah, that upset her, but she had to verify it because Russell Brand put it to her, like he made her. He said to bring it out. Right. She talked about it, but I just wanted to show you we are in control.
I know we have scriptures, and I think it's important to get into that. But there's 4 things I want to comment on.
All right.
So the 4 things I want to say are: 1, in regards to isolation and what DeWine did and other dictators through the states did last year was this quote-unquote lockdown. And honestly, what it did, it kept people separate. So you're talking about this isolation component, which is a part of psychological warfare. But it's also, I think of the Founding Fathers, how the British did a similar thing, and how, like, at least in Boston with the Green Dragon Tavern, where Samuel Adams and John Adams, his brother, met, people were able to exchange information and ideas. And even the scripture says, do not forsake the assembling of brothers, even as that evil day approaches. So there's this idea of isolation that is part of psychological warfare and torture. So everything that you said, I want to verify in regards to the increase of divorces, increase of substance abuse, and increase of domestic violence, and increase of suicides. This is all a byproduct and a result of that. Secondly, the other thing that came to my mind is this revival, if you will, of this zombie lure and culture. To me, it makes complete sense because how do you kill a zombie, Carl?
You shoot him in the forehead.
And according to the information you shared, where do we receive geographically in the brain this information as a gateway?
Through the forehead. That's the location of the prefrontal cortex.
So we now see a society of mass, cold, feckless, respectfully dumbed down people that have a herd mentality. Once again, we're talking about this collective mind think earlier in this cultist behavior, and it's a predictive programming of what is going on, and we can literally see that being reflected. But the two other things is GIGO and ROI. GIGO is garbage in, garbage out. ROI is return on investment. So as you're talking about these things, whatever garbage we put in is the garbage that's going to come out. To me, it's a difference between reaction and responding. Reaction is just kind of quick and involuntary. Response is a thought. So when you talk about garbage in, garbage out, it can also be good stuff in, good stuff out. But the return of investment of what you put into your mind is also what you're going to reap out of that. So if you're always in the state of craving your next dopamine fix, that's all you're going to be chasing. That's all you're going to be pursuing. But I don't know if anyone listening has ever indulged in too much substance, but, while you're in that moment, it's a good time. But, the morning after, or depending on how well you do it, the next couple of days after, there's a process of coming down, and it's just like, oh, I wish I wouldn't do that. But now we see culturally on a global level, that is what is occurring. People are always in this state of getting ultra, ultra high, pushing the envelope, and then coming down. And one of the things I have in my notes that I want to bring out is just the simple idea that evil has no bottom, that evil is limitless in its depravity. So as we enter into this time with the scriptures that you have, Carl, I want you to kind of maybe think about those things, what your thoughts are, and then let's kind of shell out as we are trying to be as Morpheus to our awesome audience who we love so much, the Neo, that as they share this spiritual red pill, as they share this red pill against tyranny, as they share this red pill against this antichrist system that's funneling people into this time, these are the weapons of this new warfare that we're fighting.
Yeah, I want to bring a scripture that actually came to my mind that ties in exactly with what we've established. And so I just wanted to establish scientifically and medically how we are definitely in control of our lives. When we have this feeling that says we've lost control, it's a lie. It is not true. We may not go to certain places anymore because it's closed, out of business, things have been changed, things have been altered, but we're in control. So there's this scripture in Romans chapter 2 that has always made me feel like, dadgummit, I missed the mark. Like, that's not me. It says, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is my reasonable service. And now, the idea of me looking in the mirror, seeing myself, thinking about myself, what do I think about myself? A long time, many decades, I would have never thought of myself as holy or a living sacrifice, which God saw as reasonable. And one of the biggest reasons was obviously because of the things I knew I did in my past. And people that are listening now, you may have done some things that it's easy to believe God could forgive you, but you can't forgive yourself. And that's where I lived many years of my life. It was easy for me to believe that God could forgive me so that I could go to heaven and not die and go to hell, but I couldn't forgive myself. It was much harder for me to forgive myself than my faith took to believe that God could forgive me, because I did not love myself. And I certainly didn't look at myself as holy or a living sacrifice that would be acceptable to God. I didn't even find myself acceptable to myself. So how could God accept me, and how could I be holy? And there was nothing anyone could do to validate me overcoming that. I had people tell me things are in the past. I had people try and validate me, like I had talked earlier in this podcast, that says I don't want to have the power to validate somebody. Even if I did have that power, I couldn't, because only God can validate you. And I know that through experience. But he beseeches us to be a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. And then he goes on to tell you how to do that. So this was what I learned when Daddy DeWine thought and all of the politicians thought that they were going to trap me in isolation and they were going to force me to do what they wanted me to do. I literally changed the way I view myself. I literally, for the first time in many years, forgave myself.
You flipped the script.
I did. I turned it on them, and this is what they've created. They've created Carl Tuckerson. So
he's alive. He's alive.
Here is how all of this happened to me. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so as we've established how the brain works and how the mind operates, we've established we are in control of how we respond to what is being done with this. God tells us that there's one way for you to look in the mirror or evaluate yourself and feel as though you are holy and feel as though you are validated to be a living sacrifice, and that is first and foremost, do not conform to this world. He tells us in verse 2, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Every day you get up, every day you start a day, and God blessed you with another day, you have the power and the control to choose how you start your day. The government doesn't decide that, but neither does God. We do. God does what only God can do, and then God chooses to not do what he requires us to do. It's an interactive, beautiful relationship that is real, and it is alive, and he intends for it to be intimate. And when we respond by choosing and taking the control to allow our minds to be transformed by being renewed. And how do I do that? Every day, beginning my day in his presence, in communion, in talking to him like I talk to a friend, and getting in his word and asking him, will you please help me to understand this? I don't get this. What are you trying to say to me? I so want to be changed. I so do not want to conform to society. I want to conform to your image, because everything about your image is pure and good and loving, and I want to be holy like you're holy, and I can't do that on my own. So I choose this day to commit to you to take that information, put it in my prefrontal cortex on my own free will, let it get into my frontal lobe of my brain by my choice, my power, and my control. Let it filter down in the interactions of the lower brainstem. And I want you, God, to use this mind that you created that works brilliantly. Even the atheists that don't even believe in you admit how great this is. And you did this. Please take this mind and make it and shape it for your will so that I can represent you. And that is the life that you can take back as the government fights with all of this mind control effort and manipulation and trying to develop trends in society and trying to develop lifestyle trends where your neighbor influences you. You can still love your neighbor and disagree. You can still love and get along with your neighbor and still live that life with a transformed and a renewed mind. But you have to control that. God doesn't just click his fingers. It's work. It's a discipline. It takes energy and time and choice and decision and effort. But anything in life that is wonderful is worth an effort. Anything.
I think what you said is essential. I don't want to piggyback, but the thing as you were saying that also came to my mind was James 4, verse 7. Submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. I think it's just resisting, and whether that be governmental in this regard, because for me, everything we're talking about, we're being funneled into this time of the ascension and the revealing of that man of lawlessness. As God is giving us the choice, as you're saying, that we can renew our mind. He can't do that for us. We have that choice. Everything that is being presented to us, it's, for me, this evil, this antichrist spirit that is manipulating people to not make that choice.
Yes.
There's a very clear distinction that needs to be made here. And for me, the fight is this. This is the hour that this is spreading across the world. And this is how we fight this. It's the idea of Romans 2. It's the idea of James 4:7. It's Colossians 1:21, that we knew that we were at odds with God because of our behavior. And it's establishing of behavior. It's establishing the saying, I'm getting my mind right and communing with the Almighty and resisting the urge to, whether it be go online and look at porn, whether it be go online and gossip and speak ill of people, whether it be to go in and engage in misinformation and spreading lies about things that we really know nothing about. All of this is interwoven and tied together. And, we're being funneled into this time where we're being created, we're being manipulated to go into these artificial realities, this whole metaverse with Facebook and Zuckerberg that he's releasing. I'm telling you guys, this is part of this end time eschatological fight that we are in.
I think I would just conclude with this thought. Everyone is looking to stand against something, right? The natural byproduct of standing up for God and for His Word, and that is your primary motive, and that is your thought process, and that is how you live your life, is that if you stand up and you stand for God and His Word, the natural byproduct is that there are things that you will stand against. So you can be standing, and you can be standing against something, but that isn't even really what you're doing. You're just standing for God. The natural byproduct of conforming to society is to not stand for God. If that is the decision you made this morning when you got up, that I am going to renew my mind with God's Word and resist the propaganda, the natural byproduct of renewing your mind is you will not conform to the world. I think maybe less focus should be put to conforming to the world or not conforming to the world, and more focus should be put on renewing your mind every day to God, because as long as that's your focus and as long as that's what you're standing for, it will be natural for you to just simply be standing against certain other things. And that's my final thought.
Boom. That's it. I think that's great. I got nothing else to share other than, as Carl is talking about trends, a trend that I think is something that would greatly please the Almighty is a trend of you sharing this, subscribing to our platform, getting the word out, not because we need accolades or a platform, but because I believe that what is given is more valuable than Carl and I.
I lied. I do have one other thing to say. That's the first lie of the day that I know of.
Did you repent?
For some reason, that word shrink, that we need to shrink. We need to quit thinking so big. If every single person that's listening to this podcast right now, okay, if they just think of one person that's important to them, just one, right? Just one person, not 10, not 100 million, one. And they shrink their thought process that this podcast could help just one person, and they shared that with just that one person on a smaller scale, we've doubled our impact.
Boom again. And so you can find us anywhere podcasts are: Apple Media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on Parler, we're on Gab, we're on MeWe. That's Flawed Inc. also. Questions, concerns, comments, Flawed Inc. CLE@gmail.com. My book, Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual, the link is below. Please get that. And if you've gotten it, I'm going to ask also if you could leave a 5-star, let me know and let other people know that it had value. But that being said, want to thank everybody again, and remember, it's not Happy Holidays, it's Merry Christmas.